My name is Dave Oates. I run a crisis communications, crisis PR consulting service. I'll go into my background here in just a little bit, but I really want to talk about is the crisis PR events you're likely going to face this year. I would have thought, I guess this sort of speaks to a bigger point, which is the reality is what the type of crisis communication we're facing now has as much to do with just the nuance in how we communicate, and that hasn't changed in quite some time. And meaning in the last 2 or 3 years, we have been not only sort of pervasive in the distributed way in which we all converse with one another and exchange ideas, but I only see that growing, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So a quick background on me, myths and realities of crisis PR. We'll go into a couple of case studies, and then I'll be glad to take your questions on this one. So a quick background on me. Like I said, my name is Dave Oates. I run a crisis consulting business. It's been about 28 years that I started with that. Started as a Navy officer turned Navy public affairs officer. And as you can imagine, the latter half of that career actually had me out deployed more than I was when I was driving ships in combat and engineering roles. Specifically, the last 2 gigs that I had, I was the public affairs officer, the corporate communications head, if you will, aboard an aircraft carrier. That not only just took care of the 5,000 people on that ship, but I was also in charge of the communications for the 8 other ships and submarines that went with us on deployment. So think of it as a corporate communications head of about a 7,500 person organization. And then prior to that, I was the spokesperson and public affairs officer for a joint military operation in Haiti in the late 90s. More recently, I managed the family communications and media communications for about 55 skilled nursing facilities that were obviously ground zero for COVID. The facilities were located in California. There was also a couple in Las Vegas. And that was, to say the least, intense, particularly the first 9 months. I also just finished a stint with a professional football team, matter related to at the time, their top employee, who was the subject of 25 civil lawsuits alleging sexual assault by licensed massage therapists. I don't mention the name in recorded conversations, but let's say this football team was based in Houston, so you can do the analysis from that. That employee is now property of another team based in Cleveland, just to let you know, so you can call that up. But here's what I want to talk about here. I think most people still think of crisis PR when you talk about crisis communications as these big catastrophic events that happen suddenly. They're traditional news media centric, meaning you've got roving reporters with cameras and they're on some sort of steps of a building where the business is located or courthouse steps, and a nervous spokesperson or CEO is sitting there trying to answer all these questions in front of this just bank of microphones and television cameras and things like that. And unless you have something that's of that magnitude that gets that attention, you're not in a crisis mode. And this is an example of one of those nursing homes I mentioned that made CBS This Morning, and there was a big expose on what they were doing early on. And I'll say, yes, those happen, and those still will happen, and I help with those. But those are fewer and farther between in terms of the type of crisis communication events that organizations will face. And these, while they can be short-lived, are probably not as concerning for me as the stuff that you see most organizations now having to face. The crisis communications that occur because somebody makes some sort of disparaging remark on an Instagram post or LinkedIn or Facebook, an influencer blog like medium.com, a Yelp or Glassdoor or Google review. And these things, if left unchecked, because they're not necessarily being actively monitored by a lot of organizations, particularly small to mid-sized ones, tend to fester online. Over time, they get highly ranked by Google and become a real disruptor to revenue, to profitability, to operations. This example I have is from a gentleman and it's public domain, so I have no problem sending it to him. He called me in about late 2019. He's an insurance salesman out of Chicago and very successful, who had settled with the IRS in the late 2018, so about a year prior to him calling me, for failing to pay his taxes. Now, he didn't evade them, he just forgot to pay them. And the IRS allowed him to basically pay the back taxes, punitive damages, but in doing so, he got to keep his license. So he thought everything was fine. Well, the Justice Department puts out an announcement, gets into a little business blurb. Things seem to die down. No one else sees it in his world, and certainly not his clients, and he thinks it's fine. until about a year later, it shows up on the first page of Google. So imagine this guy who gets his business predominantly from referrals. Somebody makes a referral, says, you got to talk to this guy, John. That individual, that prospect, Googles John's name, and this pops up. Because then he calls me up saying, I didn't understand why I wasn't getting new clients to the rate that I was used to, and why certain current clients were now moving their policies to another agent. I did not understand that until he went and looked this up. This is a crisis that is years, can be years in the making. And the problem with it is when left to fester online and unchecked, to remove that is impossible. You can't remove this type of content from the internet. It doesn't happen. What you have to do is create more popular content that pushes these results to the second or third page of Google. And because he waits this long and he has no real internet presence, you're talking at least a low six-figure price tag and about 18 months to completely repair this damage now that you're ahead of time. It's like when you lay cement down. Let's say you're doing a new concrete patio and you don't get the formula right, or you don't get the layout right, you don't get the grading right. The time to fix that is when it's still in a liquid form. Because when you wait and it sets, then it's a whole bigger expense to break up that concrete and redo the whole thing. That's essentially the things that are happening now, because this is the new front line for crisis communications. Everyone who carries around these wonderful little devices that we do, which are ubiquitous, is by definition a broadcaster, whether they're trained in the art or not, whether they're qualified as a news organization. I have at my disposal, without owning an FCC license or a printing press, I have a camera, a microphone, and with my social media apps like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, you name it, a distribution system. I can have a sphere of influence to talk disparagingly about an organization that I feel has not treated me well, or because I got my nose out of joint for something, I can just take it out on any organization, whether it's warranted or not. And I can do so somewhat anonymously because I don't have to confront this organization face-to-face on the phone or in a video conference. I can do it from the comfort of my living room without talking to anybody, and I certainly don't have to validate my facts. And in this case, this is how news starts to develop. It's the tail wagging the dog, like this incident that happened a couple of years ago with United Airlines. You remember that passenger gets dragged off of the plane. The reason this made national news and caused disruption to United was because everybody on that plane took out their phone, recorded this guy getting dragged off the flight. Now, keep in mind, this guy resisted arrest. So the marshals had to restrain him and put him into this type of position and drag him off the plane. But the narrative is already set, and United made the fatal error of basically putting out an announcement just to media, never talking to customers directly, never talking to their employees, never talking to all their other key audiences, basically saying it's in law enforcement's hand. Well, at that point, everybody looks at United as the culprit. And the next day, people started to record themselves shredding their frequent flyer cards on Facebook. They lost a few $1 billion in market cap over the next couple of days. It took them months to repair that. And they had to reimburse everybody's on the flight. They settled with this guy for an undisclosed amount, but it was at least seven figures. I can guarantee that within a couple of days. That's a big, expensive mistake because they did not see the fact that the social media component and the fact that everybody on that plane became a broadcaster was the issue around the crisis communication, not because the news media covered it. We see that now in so many other different things, like the Real Housewives of Atlanta actress, I'll call her for lack of a better word, who wasn't getting served at a Sammy's Wood-Fire Pizza at the LAX airport, or at least not fast enough to her, even though she saw that there were empty tables. She made the calculated guess that she wasn't being served because they were racist. Not necessarily true, because they were short-staffed and couldn't staff all the tables. She didn't care. She put an Instagram post, said, everybody put this emoji and flood the Sammy's Wood-Fire Pizza Grill LAX accounts with these hateful and disparaging remarks, and they got overwhelmed by it. And then it made People magazine. News media picked up on the fact there was a social media frenzy about this false claim. And then I've got this other here, local matter that I worked on, this veterinarian who was being accused of burning the dog, which is in dispute. The fact of the matter is that it was a Yelp review that got picked up by 2 television stations, and the television station rolled up to the veterinary office without them even understanding what was really going on until they had to answer the mail with the media, and that's when I get called in. So this is, again, where your crisis communications for most of your clients and most of you that are in this room, if you're going to deal with this is where it's going to occur. This is how it's going to manifest. And if you aren't cognizant of that by some of the tips I'm going to offer you and some of the tips you can offer your clients, it can cascade into something bigger on that. So what do? You should be the first to know when somebody's making a comment online. Monitor the online chatter of you and your organization. There are free tools to do so. You don't have to spend hard dollars. Google has an alert system that you can set up with keywords. You should have those set up for yourself, and you should have that set up for your organization. You should have that set up for key clients, so that when something gets indexed, like I talked about with that guy from Mass Mutual, within a couple of hours, if you set this parameters right, you can get alerted when somebody has made a comment on that, so you can respond. You also need to maintain a proactive internet presence, or your clients should at least do so. These mean regular postings on what you're doing in the service of customers, in the service of stakeholders, shareholders, and whomever. You should be able to do that. Don't let somebody else set the narrative online for you. That includes social media as well as a website. If there are comments that are made on a blog or review, you should be prepared to answer them. I say answer those blogs and reviews, or at least be ready to do so, and then you can make the calculation whether it's in your interest to sort of follow up with that individual. There are a few cases where you don't want to, but I will say more often than not, organizations think, well, I'm not going to dignify that with a response. The problem is you allow that narrative to then go unchecked. And this puts you into a flight mode where your comment speaks volumes, whether you meant it to be or not, because the perception is you don't care or you're incompetent. Alternatively, when you do respond, you don't want to get into a point-counterpoint debate where you're discrediting the accuser, at least directly in an accusatory, angry, vitriol tone. And I've seen that happen. And I get why. Business owners take it as a personal affront when somebody calls them out on something that they feel is unfair. The reason that owners and executives and others like that, founders, are successful is because they take their work personally. They are passionate about what they do. So somebody makes a disparaging remark, they will argue point counterpoint. But all you do is you raise the animosity in this online forum and give people the impression many times that maybe there is a there. So you need to know how you're going to respond, who's going to respond, and the roles of people when you're looking at and monitoring the online chatter. Be prepared to message and answer those comments with empathy and action. And by empathy, I don't mean culpability, but you want to acknowledge somebody's not feeling part of your value system, of your culture. They feel disenfranchised. Saying, hey, we hear you. We appreciate that you put this out there. Let's talk through how we can make this better, is a great way to diffuse a situation so you can get back to normal operations and fix whatever the underlying problem is, even if it's miscommunications, and run through likely scenarios depending on what you and your client will face, whether it's a hospitality, whether it's a consumer product, whether it's a business to business product. There'll be different scenarios that you can come up with, and review those actions regularly, because it will save you so much time and effort if something starts to build momentum, to diffuse it right away, to prevent it from becoming a crisis, to keep your profitability intact, to keep the bulk of your customers very loyal to you, and identify something that will not damage your reputation for a long period of time. I didn't put this slide on here because I didn't want you to call me. No, far from it. That's my actual phone number. That is my email address. That is my LinkedIn profile. And that is my company website. Please do not hesitate to reach out. Email is probably the best way to do so. And I will respond with you ideally within one business day, but certainly only within a couple. Worst case scenario, I'm usually pretty prompt on that one there. If you or your client have a bad dream, if you have any sort of scenario that pops up and you just want to get my 2 cents, I'll be happy to provide it. And if there's something more there, great. If not, I love what I do, and I hope that that's come through, that I'm trying to help other entrepreneurs and organizations and their service providers be a resource to make sure that they don't have to hire me for any extended period of time. Because as I tell people, it's a whole lot easier and a whole lot less expensive if you get ahead of it right away and know where the next crisis is coming from than to start chasing it after the fact. It can be done. It is salvageable. It just takes a lot more money and it takes a lot more time. And it's a lot more painful in the process. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you folks. And I am open to questions if you have any. Please don't hesitate to stump me. Whether you've got specific examples or things like that, I am open to that. Anybody got anything? I answered all of your questions.
I have
Anybody
a question, David.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jan.
So how does it work that, John's story, the insurance agent, how does it work that Google, it just stayed on the top? Is it because nothing else good filled in on top of that, or?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So Google's index ranking of content, right, based on search term, is a popularity contest. It's what are users for those specific keywords looking at the most. And in this case, because John's practice is largely offline, right? He gets referrals, it comes in by an email, picks up the phone, he has a conversation with that prospect that the referral has. He may write a handwritten note to that referral saying, thank you very much. Maybe he sends, a gift certificate to Fleming's or whatever, and moves on. He doesn't have a lot of he didn't maintain a solid internet presence. He had one page on the Mass Mutual website that was buried. So it's not that popular. He doesn't, his LinkedIn profile wasn't anything to write home about. And he certainly didn't post regularly. So in absence of having an internet presence, when the blog that came out in that little press release from the Justice Department, the IRS, because they have an invested interest to announce that they were championing the little guy. We made this guy who's a big successful insurance broker, pays back taxes and plus interest and penalties to the United States government. It's then their interest to do so. That was the only thing. That was the only relevant, real piece of content that he had. So Google, by default, looked at that and said, this is pretty popular. And it ranked it within the first page. So that's what people saw.
Wow.
So think about it, right? So
Dangerous.
He let that go for a year. Right, after that happened. And he has still no internet presence. And now, even though he's not getting a lot of traffic for people with his name, the only thing that anybody is clicking on is that, because you see that. Yeah. And now they see it in the first page, like, whoa, what's this? And they click on that. Google says, oh, that's the thing you picked out of all the options we gave you. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Wow. And it now it gets really cemented in there. So as I told him when he called me, I'm like, yeah, but you really need your own website. You need to have articles. You need to have blogs. You need to do some video stuff, because Google, by the way, is the second largest search engine YouTube is the second largest search engine next to its parent, Google. You got to build it up, and you are late to the game. So, it's just going to cost you more. It's going to take more time. That's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I know Gardner had to leave. No, it's a good question, right?
Well, it's just a good reminder about there's this whole, world out there that exists online that maybe we're not tapping into enough to understand the impact it's having on your business directly and indirectly.
And so here's some other questions that I typically get, particularly for audiences like this. First off is our professional services advisors, right? Particularly in the financial industry. Are we sort of immune to this one? Because we don't it's not like we're transacting business online. It's not like our referrals are coming in through a website. Do we have anything to really worry about? Is this something that we have to concern ourselves with? And the answer is, as in the case with John, absolutely. Because even your offline referrals will validate what somebody says to me. Oh, you know what? You need to talk to my person, right? My Jan, my John, my Joy, my Don, my Dan, whatever. And they'll Google. That's the first thing people do, is they will Google what's there. And so if you don't have an online presence, that validates what people say about you offline, about how good you are at your craft, how customer focused you are, how caring and concerned, and they see something different. Best case scenario, it slows them down. It extends the sales cycle, but likely it kills them, as it did for this guy. His pipeline dried up. And, that's significant. And then of course, now I'm telling him it's 6 figures at a time when his revenues, 6 figures to repair in 18 months at a time when his revenues dropping. So it's a real tough spot.
I have another example of that. It just came to mind. I had a horticultural supply company in LA, North County, LA, or North LA. And, we liked the deal. We were going to finance them. We were going to provide them working capital. And my head underwriter did exactly that, went to Google. And the very first thing they saw was this kind of employee versus employer, you shoved me, you did this, you didn't do that, you didn't pay me. And, and there was some court action going on too, but they did nothing. And it was a long time ago. And my credit people came back and said, we can't do this deal because they are not, they don't have the integrity that we would require of one of our clients. And so we went back and said, we're not going to finance you because of that. And
not in the financial services space, but I had a call from a friend of mine who runs a terrific consulting firm in another discipline. And this person called me up because they all of a sudden lost a client that literally was a day from signing the contract to do some services. And as part of their due diligence, they went online and saw a couple of Glassdoor reviews about this company from employees who said, we're being worked to death. And it stopped. It stopped it cold. They walked away, and they walked away because they said, we're concerned you're so overwhelmed with client right now, just based on those 2 reviews, that you can't handle our account. So we're going to take a pause. Yeah. That was on 2 reviews on Glassdoor. Now, fair? Is that something that Dan, I saw you shaking your head like, oh my God, would somebody really do that? Somebody did, right? Mm-hmm. Right or wrong, truth or not, whether that, could be 2 disgruntled people who didn't want to actually put an honest day's work, right? There's that other narrative. The perception is there, and it went unchecked. This goes back to the part about maintaining, monitoring, and responding. It went unchecked. It was the only narrative out there. And I certainly wouldn't have recommended that this consulting firm, argue back like, you just didn't want to work hard. You were there, blah, blah, blah. You kept taking breaks. You kept taking time off, this, that, and the other thing. You don't want to do that, but you certainly want to address the matter. Because they lost a significant piece of business that was literally a day from closing.
A day away. Wow. Yeah. So important.
Hey, Dave, I'm curious. So, you've mentioned reviews on Google, Yelp, and Glassdoor, different places. Do you ever run across this phenomenon exists and it's been written about? Do you run across situations where a kind of an evil story, for want of a better term, has been planted deliberately by a competitor who wants to screw the company? And it may be completely false. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with those?
I get that question a lot. I appreciate that. There's a perfect way to respond to that one, particularly if you fully believe that it's a fake customer and it's a review likely from a competitor. You still want to message your answer with empathy and action, right? So you want to respond. So the response would be something in the kin like, and this can go for any type of organization: professional services, retail, plumber, electrician, high-end car repair service. You're like, hey, we're really sorry your experience wasn't pleasant with us. We really appreciate the review. We'd like to rectify this. By the way, we have no record of you as a customer. Would you mind calling this number so we can correlate this? Now, here's the other part of this, Dan, and I appreciate you bringing this up. When you respond to like an online review or a blog comment or a social media post, you have to come at it with the mindset, I'm not changing this reviewer's mind. They may have, in many cases, an ulterior motive to writing that one. They just want to discredit this for their own personal benefit because they've got a competing entity, right? So you're telegraphing to everybody else who reads that this is likely a bogus review, or at least you shouldn't take it for face value, but you do it with empathy and action, right? Because you're giving yourself the opportunity to say, maybe it really is somebody. You don't really know. But you can say, we don't have a record of this. Would you mind calling us? We'd like to fix it. You're offering that in, and people are like, oh, maybe it's not. And almost every time, particularly when you know it's a competitor, they don't respond at all, right? They know they've been busted.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that you're saying it has the unconscious effect of letting other readers know, yeah, it's probably a bogus review without you ever having to say it.
And look, here's the deal, right? Haters are going to hate for whatever reason they are. And maybe, let's put it out there. Maybe you had a bad day, you had an off day, right? Nobody hits it out of the park every time, right? We're all human, right? So if you did make a mistake, you should own it. You should own it right away and you should fix it. But even in the best days, you're going to have somebody whose nose is out of joint, who had an expectations that was unrealistic. I could put a cute little kitten video on YouTube with some tabby playing with a ball of yarn, and I'll get 1,000 upload, 1,000 thumbs up. I'm going to get 5 down checks. I don't know what those 5 people's problems are, right? They should do some serious self-evaluation. Even if you don't like cats, like, why are you? But they will address it and move on. And so this is the other thing we talk about, right? So when you get in the response about ignoring it or getting into a fight mode, it's because the entrepreneurs, the business owners, the executives, the people in the professional services who have achieved a level of competency and success have done so overgeneralizing because they possess 2 characteristics. First one is they've ignored the naysayers, right? People told them they couldn't do something. You're not in a position, you don't have the experience, you don't have the skill set, you're not the right gender, depending on it's a man's world out there, blah, 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 this, that, the other thing. And they tune it out and they focus on the eye and the prize, right? So that's one. The second is when somebody purposely throws an obstacle in their way, they are ready and able to barrel right through it, to fight, punch through it, over it, around it, whatever, they get through it. And that's the attitude they take when somebody is personally because people take their professional work personally. When they feel like there's a personal affront, that's the default position for many businesses and executives and business owners. But that fight or flight mentality in a public domain setting, whether it's an online review or social media post or whatever, will be to your detriment because you will just exacerbate the dialogue. You'll extend that news cycle. You will give people pause to think maybe there's something there because this is really somebody who's taking this way too hard. And you certainly don't diffuse it to get you back to normal operations. And when I get hired in, my responsibility is how quickly can we diffuse a situation to get an organization or an individual back to whatever they are supposed to be doing, back to whatever thing that they're supposed to spend their bulk of their time on. That's my approach. How are negative reviews managed, especially when they can't be reviewed? I hope I mentioned it that way, Andrea. You got to respond with empathy and action. And even in cases where you don't necessarily agree with that, like with the reviewer, if the reviewer had a bad experience, we're like, hey, we're sorry you didn't have a good experience. We always try our best. Here are the things that here's the things that we strive to do. Obviously that wasn't enough for you. We'd like to see if there's a way to rectify it. Please call us and let's see what we can do. Otherwise, we just wish you all the best and thank you for your comments. We will certainly take those under consideration. And sometimes that's the best you can do when there's an agree to disagree. But what you don't want to do is not say anything or get into a real argument. And to your second point, with few exceptions, your reviews cannot be removed. There are specific terms and conditions, and Yelp has probably the best of them, that will say I can remove a review when you can showcase that somebody wasn't pretending to be a customer. I've had one instance on that veterinary client, because we're doing some online reviews, where it was shown to be the lawyer of that accuser. We said, look, this person wasn't a customer, he was a lawyer. He didn't mention that, hey, this wasn't my service or things like that. But if you have somebody in there, Dan, to your point, pretending to be a customer, and we're saying, hey, this is a fake review, Yelp's like, we're not getting into it, right? Unless you can definitively prove that this person is not a customer, then you can't do that. Like you say, oh, we know it's not because it's a competitor. Look at what they're saying. Yeah, no, that's a word choice. The other way Yelp will remove a reviewer is if they violate the hate speech provisions in their terms and conditions. If they call for, I've seen it where we need to burn this facility down, or this person needs to be shot, or those callous comments like that. Yelp will remove those right away. but that person can come back, write something that's less inflammatory, but still disparage, and Yelp will be like, that's fine. So you have to go with the mindset that with the few exceptions, under those type of pretenses, the review is not going to be removed. So answer with empathy and action to diffuse that situation, to allow everybody to know that you care, that you're taking action, or maybe they shouldn't count this one or take it as face value and move on. Andrew, I hope that answers your question. Don, for whatever reason, we're not hearing you. You want to put your question in the chat, that's certainly a way to do that. Because I see it doesn't look like you're not muted, but that's all right. Dan, did you have something else?
Yeah, well, he's doing that. I was just going to make the observation. You said something a few minutes ago, which I thought was really important and often overlooked. You want to get the client.
I hope I can remember what that was.
Well, I'll tell you, I think what you said was that you want to get the client back to focusing their time and their attention on what they should be doing, on the work they should be. And that is, that's an often overlooked price, the price of management distraction. And it's often overlooked, but it can be a very expensive price for management to pay and for a company to pay when things come up, unexpected things that the company ends up, for whatever reason, not dealing with right. And they end up getting sucked into a vortex of continuing, kind of point, counterpoint, punch, counterpunch, when they should be getting out of that mode and getting back to focusing on what they need to be focusing on. That can cost companies a lot of money.
I appreciate that. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with this audience, is that is a hidden cost that doesn't necessarily show itself prominently on a P&L statement, right? Unless you can really extrapolate, like, why is our G&A so high? Well, because we've hired 5 other people because everybody's so busy. Yeah, but is everybody productive, right? Have you measured productivity? And the productivity is productivity related to fulfilling on the goods and services that you have and are closing more deals. That's just, it's a real challenge to see that. But I agree with you. That's my goal. Preserve the reputation in the early stage of the crisis. I want to restore at least to a level of confidence, or at least an understanding by multiple audiences, which, by the way, as a side, in a crisis situation, I always tell organizations, your employees are your number one concern. Make sure they're informed, make sure that they are kept in the loop, because they will help you with all the other audiences. If you keep them out of the loop, or you make them the last people you talk to, they will undermine, only by default, if not by design, all your other efforts. Because when customers call in saying, I just got this email, I have no idea what's going on, the employee's like, me either. I don't have a clue, right? That doesn't give a whole lot of confidence to your people who are actually helping you pay the bills, right? So employees are the first concern. But you got to give people the opportunity to be able to restore that confidence, get back to normal operations, and then that's when the C-suite and whoever else needs to be involved get back to, what are the fundamental problems? You know what? Our HR policies aren't really up to speed. We need to bring in an employment attorney and an HR consultant to buoy this up, so we don't have this issue where a teammate feels disenfranchised. They feel like they have been in a hostile work environment. We need, they didn't understand this policy and now they squawked on Glassdoor. You know what? Our CEO isn't communicating effectively, needs to have some coaching set up there. We're going to put this person into some peer level group or have one-on-one coaching. Our product fulfillment is not very good, right? We've got we've got a product yield rate that's not up to speed. We know it. Customers are talking about that. They're doing that. What do we need to do? Let's bring in some people that can help us improve that. Whatever the fundamental business issue is, should be the next step to get you, to fix that. But you got to get to a stage where you get the opportunity to do so. And that means, for me, helping to communicate to give that airspace so you get back to normal operations. That also dovetails back to what I talked about are the 2 cardinal things in every messaging. You got to express empathy, even if you don't express culpability, but you also have to tell them what you're going to do to fix whatever the issue is. Communicate better. We're going to fix this one problem. We're going to take care of this employment matter, and then go do it. Because if it comes back again 3 or 4 months later, it's that much harder to restore that, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Then you've lost audiences. Then you're going to hemorrhage staff. customers, investors, shareholders, and all that in between. That's just how it goes.
Dave, I got one. Something else that you said several
Sure.
minutes ago about, I think it was about the insurance guy. And I think you meant 6 months of work to get him back to where that.
No. Try 18 months and 6 figures.
Oh,
and he didn't take me up on
18 months. Okay.
Yeah, and he didn't take me up on, and he didn't take me up on it, by the way.
Okay, because I was going to ask you what kind of things you did for him.
Here's the things I would have done, right? And I would have brought in others to help out with this one. You got to build up his internet presence. First thing you got to do is he's got to create his own website, and he's got to create his own footprint on that. But the second thing is he's got to have genuine, informative, entertaining, captivating content in both video and blog form that he promulgates on an active, well-kept, well-managed social media engine, predominantly LinkedIn, given his audience. But I would say also you should at least do Twitter and likely Facebook. You've got to draw people to then look at this content and create this popularity where his information gets indexed higher on Google and pushes that negative stuff to at least the second page, if not the third page. But he had, like I said, he had one page that was sort of on the back end of a Mass Mutual site where it's like, meet the advisors, and you click on, and you've got that myriad of advisors in the Chicago area, and you click on the one guy, and his little basic page shows up. You know, Google looks at that, but unless people are like really going to that, which they're not, because he's not putting any stock into that. He certainly wasn't advertising that. He certainly wasn't putting any, it wasn't getting anywhere. And that's really all he had. He had no, he had a LinkedIn account, but he wasn't active on it. He had no other social media. He hates it. I get it, right? A lot of people don't like social media for a whole host of reasons. But if you're going to build up a presence to stave off what happened to him when the negative piece comes out, or at least provide other a more complete narrative, that's what you got to do. And he didn't. And he was just so far behind the game that it was going to take that long to build up. It's like what you would have to invest for an organization that should have done it years ago, because that's what it was.
Did you ever follow up with him 10 months later, a year, to see what happened?
I did look at I did Google his name again, like 6 months later. It was still all there.
Wow. So he's still in business and still limping his way through.
He's going to be, he would have to, he would have to then go about the hard way in restoring the trust and confidence offline.
Oh, yeah.
And the success on that one's going to be very marginal. And he's just going to have to set the lower revenue. And he goes off with that, right? I don't know how successful he is now relative to what he is. Maybe he's back up to speed, right? But I guarantee it cost him a lot. It cost him a lot more time and money on that. So.